West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
One of the easy and I think basically false cliches about the media, about the news media, is that the news used to be way better. That the news used to not be controversial, that the news used to be always spoken in a calm, authoritative voice with no snark and no attitude, and everybody agreed it was just the facts. And that's as far as it went. You hear that kind of facile cliche about what the news used to be like. You hear it all the time. You hear even very smart people assert that that was true about the media in the good old days, and couldn't we just go back to that? The problem with that is if you actually go back and listen to what the news was like in the good old days, it blows that thesis out of the water almost instantly. Take, for example, the dripping sarcasm in this newsreel from the aforementioned good old days.
Peaceful Finland, that distant northern country of lakes and fjords, of sailing ships and summer bathing beaches, has been invaded and bombed. The long crisis of apparently futile negotiation with Moscow has ended in attack by overwhelming power. The reason for this? The Soviet, a nation of some 180 millions, has been threatened by the 4 millions in Finland. The huge Russian Air Force, probably the biggest in the world, fears for its very existence. And the Red Fleet, no doubt, has been gravely menaced by Finland's 2 or 3 warships. What are the real facts?
The good old days of voice of God authoritative news with no snark, right? That was a 1939 British newsreel, just dripping with sarcasm as to why on earth the Soviet Union felt like it could convince anybody that the reason it needed to invade the neighboring nation of Finland was that Finland was some sort of threat to it, when Finland obviously was no threat. I mean, Soviet Union, just like Putin is claiming about Ukraine now, the Soviet Union did claim that they were somehow in mortal danger from the much, much, much smaller country on their border. This country with a much, much, much smaller military, a country that was doing nothing at all to menace its much larger neighbor to the east. Just like what Putin is saying about Ukraine, the Soviet Union said the same thing about Finland in 1939. But the Soviet army did invade Finland in late 1939. And it appears that their plan was to topple the government in Finland, probably in a matter of a few days. They thought it would not be hard. The Soviet military went in by land, by sea, and by air. They used about 100,000 troops, which was huge. Their military just dwarfed the military force that the Finns had to defend themselves. And their plan was that the Soviet Union would basically just take Finland, install their own puppet pro-Soviet government, or maybe just even annex Finland, make Finland part of the USSR, erase it as a sovereign country. And again, they didn't think it would be hard. They thought it would take maybe a few days. It did not work that way. The Finns in 1939 fought them off furiously. I mean, at the time, there were less than 4 million people in Finland, 180 million people in the Soviet Union, and proportionate militaries to those populations. The Finns were outnumbered. They were wildly outgunned, but they were also resourceful. They were fighting on their own home turf, and they were more motivated than you can possibly imagine. They were defending their homes. That was called the Winter War. It started when the Soviets invaded in late 1939. I'm sure Stalin thought his forces would be home for the new year. Instead, it stretched on into 1940. The Finns wore this remarkable white winter camouflage. They fought on skis and snowshoes, and they just cut down the invading Soviet forces. Finland, in fact, didn't have its own air force at all, but they still managed to shoot down dozens of Soviet airplanes. In one famous battle in central Finland, it was 6,000 Finnish troops versus more than 20,000 Soviet troops, and the Finns just routed them, despite being outnumbered to such a massive extent. The Soviets suffered huge casualties, hundreds of thousands of casualties ultimately in their Finland invasion. And the Western world was shocked. The Western world had thought that the Soviets would have won in just a few days too. I mean, the Soviets thought that, but everybody else looking in thought that. When the Finns put up this unexpected and incredibly effective resistance, they became a cause célèbre all over the United States. Even though our government didn't send them nearly as much practical help as they wanted, we still cheered them on. Well, in the end, although it didn't go the way he expected it to at the beginning, Stalin regrouped. He sent in not another 100,000 Soviet troops, but more like 500,000 Soviet troops to get the job done. The population of Finland was less than 4 million people in the whole country. Stalin had to send in 500,000 troops to finish the invasion in the end. But the Finns still fought. They held their ground for weeks, even after the 500,000 Soviet troops arrived in that second wave of the invasion. The Finns were able to hold on ultimately for more than 100 days. And in the end, it did end. The Finnish government was not toppled. They negotiated a peace with the Soviets. And the negotiated settlement was bad for Finland, but it was nowhere near as bad as what Stalin had intended for when he invaded in the first place and just thought he'd run roughshod over the place. In the negotiated settlement that ended the Winter War, Finland did have to cede about 10% of its territory to the Soviets, which is bad. But they stayed Finland. They kept their independence as a nation. They kept their sovereignty. They kept their way of government. They even got to keep their army. They got to stay who they are. And they also never forgot it. And because Russia invaded Ukraine, support has spiked in Finland and also in neighboring Sweden for those two countries to now join NATO. They never wanted to before, but now they do. One of the million different contradictory justifications Putin's given for why he needed to invade Ukraine, one that you often hear parroted by people in this country apologizing for Putin, is this idea that Putin felt cramped by NATO, that too many countries to the west of Russia had joined NATO. They were too close to Russian borders, so he had to invade Ukraine to ensure that Ukraine would never join NATO. He's made this case that the reason for the war, at least one reason for this invasion, is that Putin couldn't stand the feeling of having any NATO countries right up against Russia's borders. Well, congratulations, Mr. Putin. Guess what you got for invading Ukraine? Even if Finland alone joins NATO, you will have just more than doubled the amount of Russian land border with NATO countries. Well done. Sweden's ruling party, the Social Democrats, they've always been against Sweden joining NATO, as has the Swedish public. But now both the Swedish public and that ruling party in Sweden have changed their minds. In Sweden, the Social Democratic Party put out a statement yesterday that said, quote, "When Russia invaded Ukraine, Sweden's security position changed fundamentally." And so even though they have always been opposed to Sweden joining NATO, they're now expected to favor it. And the Swedish government is expected to decide on applying for NATO membership as soon as this summer. Even sooner than that, it looks like Finland is going to make its request to join. And NATO will say yes when these countries ask. One recent poll in Finland shows that even though just a couple of years ago, a majority of the Finnish public didn't want their country to join NATO, since Putin invaded Ukraine, they're sure in favor of it now. The Finnish people are now 68% in favor of joining, and that number spikes to 77% in favor of joining if the Finnish government studies the issue and decides to recommend it. Well, next week, the Finnish government is going to present a security review on this issue to their parliament. A recent survey of members of the Finnish parliament says that of the 200 MPs, they've got the 200 members of parliament, 194 are in favor of Finland joining NATO. That's 194 in favor, 6 against, which means the Finnish government is going to recommend that they join NATO, and the Finnish public is going to support them, and it's going to pass. And it's going to pass soon, apparently. A former prime minister of Finland tells the AFP this week that it is a foregone conclusion that Finland will request NATO membership, and the request will happen within the next few weeks. It'll happen in time for the next NATO summit in June. Now, Russia has responded by threatening that there's going to be consequences if that happens. Consequences including military consequences if 2 new nations join NATO. But these aren't just any 2 countries. I mean, particularly Finland. Since the Winter War in 1940, Finland has been getting ready for those kinds of threats from this country that invaded them before. And at least now is implicitly threatening that they might do it again. Finland is actually remarkably ready for those threats. In Finland, the country maintains secure stockpiles of at least a 6-month supply of all major food grains, things like oats and wheat. They also maintain a 6-month stockpile of all major fuel supplies. They require all pharmaceutical companies in Finland to keep secure stockpiles of several months' worth of all major imported drugs. Every building above a certain size in Finland is required to have a bomb shelter. That's on top of a national plan that repurposes underground parking garage and ice rinks and pools into civilian shelters in the event of invasion. In the country's capital, in Helsinki, they have built 10 million square meters of underground space underneath Helsinki proper. It includes it's not just like shelters and subway stations. It's an art museum and a church and a huge swimming complex and a mall and a go-karting track. You know, you might need it. Also a huge drinking water reservoir, all underground, all beneath the capital city of Helsinki for safety. One former defense minister in Finland telling the Financial Times this week how, quote, detailed planning is in place for how to handle an invasion, including the deployment of fighter jets to remote roads around the country, the laying of mines in key shipping lanes, the preparation of land defenses such as blowing up bridges. He says, quote, all armed forces headquarters are located in hillsides under 30 to 40 meters of granite. So they're ready. And here we've got Russia failing in Ukraine. They thought they would run roughshod over Ukraine. They thought they would walk in, they'd take Kiev within days. They thought they would decapitate the Ukrainian government and take over the country in less than a week.
It is Wednesday, the 13th of April of 2022. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Now, fret not. It's not as toxic masculinity violence as it may seem at first blush. It's really just a nod to a very lovely egg dish with an equally lovely but very velvety hollandaise sauce. So fret not. Yeah, I know there's a smidgen of an association with the movie Beckett. Okay, I mean, to be clear. You know, the great movie with Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton, the titans of the cinema. And they were angry young men, too, at one time, when they were young. That's how you become an angry young man. What happens when an angry young man gets old? Oh boy, I don't know. You don't want to take necessarily the trajectory of some angry young men. You might have cirrhosis of the liver. Be careful. All right. So the war continues apace, and Putin is finding out, and small little countries can take steps to keep big old countries at bay. All right. Apparently Zelensky snubbed the Germans. The new leader of Germany wanted to go there and have his Churchill moment. What? Yeah, Boris. Boris went there and had his Churchill moment. I guess that's what you call it. But apparently Zelensky said, no, we don't want you. There's when he spoke by video conference call there to the German legislative body. Is it a parliament? Nonetheless, he was quite angry at Germany. So he basically said, you want to come here? No, thanks. We got this. Well, at the same time, he's entertaining quite a few other leaders. In country, by the way. So, is that are world leaders using themselves as targets to see what Putin would do? Would Putin and his troops actually bomb Kyiv when leaders from around the world are meeting? Because, I don't know, mobsters think in a weird, different way than the rest of us. What I like to call normal people. I really do like to think that we are the normal people and the mobsters are the abnormal ones that shouldn't be deified and made heroic. Yeah, I know James Caan played a good Sonny, but the character Sonny should not be made into a hero. I am sorry. Michael, such a good kid starting out. What happened? Well, apparently when you delve into mobster mentality, it makes you into what I call abnormal. All right. And that abnormality seems to have, permeated and percolated and, fermented too into a concoction of, I don't throw this term around lightly, but it sure smells like a concoction of evil. And these people will take pitchforks, anti-aircraft missiles. I don't understand. How is it that people can amass grenades, military-grade assault rifles, or military-grade rifles? I know. If you call them assault, that's so wrong. It negates your whole argument. You use the wrong word. Well, military-grade weaponry, okay? And not be licensed to be in a military to have it. They can just get it. And they'll have conventions like at the county fairgrounds to show you how to build the stuff on your own so no one can trace it. Why would you do that? Apparently being a mobster is okay. I'm only a foot soldier in the cause. Yeah, the cause of crime and mayhem? Jeez. All right. Before Mel Gibson was found out to be like a total Looney Tune, all you had to do was look at the upbringing that guy had. Yeah. Look into it. His dad's like a pretty virulent, weird sect Catholic that I don't even think the Catholics of any ilk anywhere in the world, be it Ukrainian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Methodist Orthodox, no one would, thinks this guy has any credibility in spiritual matters, shall we say. But that's the upbringing that Mel Gibson had. In the outback in Australia, too, which makes it even worse because the environment, the landscape can shape behavior and the mind. But before we found out about Mel Gibson, and it kind of, I don't know how it is for you, but it kind of intrudes sometimes on my viewing of those movies. But in Road Warrior, Mad Max, the Road Warrior, when they come upon the, I called them the neo-romantics, the people all dressed in white muslin out there in the middle of the outback desert protecting a small little refinery so they can get drops and drops and drops of some sort of petrol that they can explode and make an internal combustion engine run. Why they needed to have that and did that, I don't know. People hold on to things until there's none of it left, and then they cry like, where did it go? So I sometimes think that we might be that little band of neo-romantics out there in the middle of the desert trying to hold on to whatever it was that we thought made us a society. So I really don't want to have that kind of landscape, shall we say. Psychological or physical. My God. Who does? But apparently there's a bunch of delusional weirdos out there, about 70 some odd million. That's the scary part. That's not a small number when you think about it. Yeah. I've always argued that in modern times, when they would always talk about, astronomical numbers, because there's so many planets and, stars in the sky. Of course, we now know there's many planets, but there's so many stars in the sky that, you can't really wrap your head around it and stuff. And I argued at the time, well, actually, I think what we should do is that we should call it banking numbers, because who can wrap their head around 10 trillion bucks? Who can? The money in this bill is astronomical. No, it's banking numbers. My God. Okay. Oh, I want to say thank you to the person who listened to our YouTube channel here, our West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Yeah, we post on YouTube because, you get it out on as many platforms as possible. But I had a very nice comment about yesterday's show and speaking about the family and all that, which I suppose one shouldn't do because it might be a HIPAA violation. Might be, but it's not. And I want to say thank you because mostly the kind of comments I get on there are links to Russian porn sites or, get a Russian wife. And I'm like, I don't know. I might be a mistake, I figure, if you've gone through a couple of American wives, is it going to get any better getting a Russian one? I don't know. Sounds like active measures to me. It sure does. Anyway, don't click on those links, and I never do. So that was very kind of the person who reached out and made a very lovely comment about the show. And as I told the team, it was actually kind of a shock. Usually I go there and go, oh, another one of those. It's like spam. It's, pretty soon it's going to be like car warranty porno. They're going to have to match things up, right? How many car warranty teleconference places are there? Call centers is what I'm trying to say. How many car warranty call centers are there? I'll get it out. Oh, which reminds me, since I I guess you could say I failed at stand-up comedy because when they tell you to sit down, I guess you're not going to be standing up, are you? Anyway, Gilbert Gottfried died at, 67, which doesn't seem very old because that's my age. Yeah, well, he had a unfortunate ailment, too, that affected his heart. But, the guy had a definite presence, shall we say. And maybe his acerbic style rubbed folk the wrong way. And, I guess so. But by all accounts, he was a very sensitive and a surprisingly shy fellow. Which, to me, that's not so surprising because people get into performance sometimes to get out of their shell. But the world is not necessarily a stage, and they get back into their shell when they're not on the stage. And that's the human nature. And, which then makes me, which then brings me to Bill Maher and his, he assaulted that poor actress about, anxiety. She had confessed, he goes on to her podcast, and she has confessed to suffering anxiety and whatnot and, how to cope. And he comes on to her podcast, apparently, and starts attacking her. Like, what is it with you kids about your anxiety? Can't you take it? God, we used to run barefoot across broken glass so that we could come home to our moms to cause them anxiety. What's wrong with you? I don't know what. Man, can you imagine having Bill Maher as your kid growing up? My God. Something apparently went, well, you can't always blame the parents, but sometimes you can. If I'm going to blame Mel Gibson's wacko religious fanatic dad, what happened to Bill Maher's parents? Yikes. Well, anyway, at some point, people can make up their own decisions about how they're going to lead their lives. And if you were raised by mobsters and you know the world is not a mobster world, then maybe you don't have to adhere to that prior training, that prior conditioning, and then recondition, well, that part of your brain that might bring you back into being a productive member of society. Isn't that what we were supposed to indoctrinate our kids over? See, this is the other thing I don't understand. All these law and order types are now whining about indoctrination in the schools. What do you call standing up, saying the Pledge of Allegiance with your hand over your heart? Please. And it was worse in other schools. In other schools, they had to have a prayer, too. Well, public schools. In private schools like Catholic schools that I have some experience in, yeah, we were led in a morning convocation as well. But, sometimes it was in Latin, so it made it a little bit different, like a chant. Which is another way to indoctrinate. It is repetition. Where are we going with this? Well, I'll tell you where we're going with this. We're going right now to speak about what we have curated for the rest of the show for you. And that was great to have Rachel back. She's going to be back every night this week and then one night a week on Mondays. And I'm going to say it again. Rachel, you're on Monday Night Football, on this coast. Now I can tune you in at our 9 p.m. hour, but that's when all of your shows already been talked about on social media during the football game. Just saying. Not Tuesday, not Wednesday. It's got to be Monday. Okay. Anyway, what's on our curated part of the show? Thank you, Rachel, for breaking it down about how Putin lashing out at NATO has now caused Sweden, Finland, and I'm going to tell you quite a few others. There's already some in the Soviet bloc besides the Ukraine who are, I have heard on the low, are making some entreaties to join NATO as well. Making old Vlad very mad. And I say, too bad. On the rest of the menu, the Wisconsin Supreme Court is set to hear arguments on whether the amount of ballot boxes should be increased. Or are ballot boxes a conspiracy by pedophiles to destroy America? It's going to be a hard choice for them. I think they're going to go on getting rid of the ballot boxes because who wants pedophiles destroying America? The New York lieutenant governor resigned after his arrest in a federal probe on corruption, but he's going to remain on the primary ballot. And after his Republican colleagues finally turned on him, the South Dakota Attorney General became the first official to be impeached in the state's history. Yeah, you know this guy Ravensburg ran over a farmer walking on the side of the farm road and then lied about it, covered it up. And he just went a step too far, didn't he? He did. Oh, yes, but after the break, then we move to the chef's table for our amuse-bouche, where the potential of a far-right victory in France is seen as a threat to the European Union. Well, that's a little kiss. And a cryptocurrency expert was sentenced to more than 5 years in federal prison for helping North Korea evade U.S. sanctions. Of course, he was told that there were these love letters between North Korea and you-know-who. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link across the page, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And I know inflation is causing everybody's earning power to be decreased. Doesn't that seem like a conspiracy by the mucky-muck uppity-ups? People finally get a living wage, and what do? Well, we'll get back at them. We'll just raise prices so that they're making $2.10 an hour again. Thank you. Anyway, I know times are tough, but if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink and send those funds to us instead once a month, it really does help us pay our bills, and the bills keep increasing, and, everything else. Our earning power to be able to pay those bills continues to decrease because of the magic of the market, apparently. Yeah, that's magic. Sounds like a sleight of hand to me. Anyway, if you could send those funds to us once a month, it does help us pay our bills, which then allows us to fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance, as we have been resisting for the last 11 years in a powerhouse way, too, because of you. And thank you for your generosity, all kidding aside. We would really be unable to do it without you, because you are our biggest contributor. Yes, you are. Thank you. Hey, if you would like to follow Netroots Radio, as if you have never heard this before, but you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and I'll tell you why. Because I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Cuz about 10 minutes before showtime. You know where the real reportage is, or you can find the real reportage by the show notes and links. But I post that on Daily Cuz, and then I post that up on all those social media platforms out there, Twitter included. No matter what Elon Musk thinks he's going to do. Did you hear he's in trouble? Yeah, the Security Exchange Commission is kind of upset that he, I told you, he was kind of being a little secretive about his stake in Twitter. And he was trying to drive the price down so he could buy more shares and then really take over the thing. And I think he wants to monkey wrench it and take it out of existence. That's what I think. Okay, talking about upbringing. Blood emeralds will do that to you, won't it? Uh-huh. It does, and it has. Or it has, and it is. I'll get it out. Anyway, follow us at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Follow me on Twitter because, I post those show notes and links on Daily Cuz and then post that on Twitter. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And also, please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., 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 and the deep archive of all the Netroots Radio shows over all these many 11 years can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. Okay. Apparently the person of interest in the subway shooting is now a suspect. I figured. I don't know. Seemed like he might fit the description of the shooter. Why does someone rent a U-Haul with their own name unless they're expecting to get caught or, I don't know, end up dead, or I don't know. Who does that? A lot of us would say, not like an insulting way or a derisive way, but a crazy person does that. And by all accounts, the guy's perception of the world is just slightly off, shall we say, slightly. Slightly enough that the threats that he made against the new mayor caused them to up his security detail. And, I will be making all public pronouncements from the confines of my, domicile with all my security detail. And it'll be because of COVID. Because it is. On that front, too, we'll speak a little bit about it during the weather report. Because that's where we do the COVID forecast. Okay. But anyway, I keep telling everybody it is not over. And everywhere I go, people are acting like it is over, and it is not. Pennsylvania has to lock down their public transit system because of what? Yeah, infection spike. Thank you very much. All right, we better get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And it comes, of course, by the Associated Press. I'm holding off on Reuters until they divest themselves to Russia, okay? I'm a little hesitant about sourcing them. I like Reuters, but with the Russian backing, it's just a little too tough. Can't do it. Okay. So Scott Bauer out of the Associated Press. Wisconsin Supreme Court was scheduled to hear arguments today in a case that will likely determine how extensively absentee ballot drop boxes can be used in the upcoming midterm election where the battleground state's Democratic governor and Republican U.S. senator are on the ballot. The court in February barred the use of drop boxes outside of election clerk offices for the April-spring election. Don't ask me why. You would think that would be the obvious place to put it if you're going to limit it to one. But they don't even want that. And they had a special election for local offices such as mayor, city council, and school board were decided. You know, the battleground of the school boards. Steve Bannon and his fascist ilk have been proclaiming that to be the strategy. But the larger question the court has yet to address is whether to allow the secure ballot boxes going forward in places such as libraries, grocery stores, and other locations. The fight is being closely watched by Republicans as they push to limit access to absentee ballots because somehow paper ballots can't be hacked. And that's why they are so angry about it, isn't it? They thought they had a lockdown on this election, but they did not take into consideration a pandemic, which by its very definition is an international calamity. It is. State law is silent on drop boxes, but the bipartisan Wisconsin Elections Commission has told local election officials they can be placed at multiple locations. A Waukesha County judge ruled in January that the Election Commission's guidance was contrary to the law, and that the guidance was actually an administrative rule that was invalid because it was not put in place properly. The state Supreme Court will also be deciding whether to let stand the judge's ruling that prohibited anyone other than the voter from returning an absentee ballot. I'm going to wheel my 86-year-old mom in the cold to vote. Oh, you mean you don't want her to vote? That's what they mean. Well, advocates for people with disabilities and others, like people like me, argue that that restriction makes it more difficult for some voters who have limited mobility or other physical impairments from returning their ballots. If you can't climb these 6 steps on your own, you're not a human being and you can't vote. Wisconsin's top elections official testified last year that at least 528 drop boxes were used by more than 430 communities in the presidential election. The popularity of absentee voting exploded during the pandemic in 2020, with more than 40% of all voters casting mail ballots, a record high. And remember how happy we were about that? And they took our happiness and they put a knee to its throat. Villeneuve and Tom Hayes of the Associated Press bring us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. New York Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin resigned yesterday, Tuesday, in the wake of his arrest in a federal corruption investigation, creating a political crisis for Governor Kathy Hochul 7 months after she selected Benjamin as a partner to make a fresh start in an office already rocked by scandal. Benjamin, a Democrat, was accused in an indictment of participating in a scheme to obtain campaign contributions from a real estate developer in exchange for Benjamin's agreement to use his influence as a state senator to get a $50,000 grant of state funds for a nonprofit organization the developer controlled. Facing charges including bribery, fraud, conspiracy, and falsification of records, Benjamin pleaded not guilty at an initial appearance in Manhattan federal court. He was released and bail was set at $250,000. The terms of his release call for his travel to be restricted and bar him from returning to the state capital in Albany. He submitted his resignation to Hochul hours later. But apparently, he will remain on the primary ballot. Of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The South Dakota House impeached State Attorney General Jason Ravensborg yesterday, Tuesday, over a 2020 car crash in which he killed a pedestrian, but initially said he might have struck a deer or another large animal. Ravensborg, a Republican, is the first official to be impeached in South Dakota history. He will at least temporarily be removed from office pending the historic Senate trial, where it takes a 2/3 majority to convict on impeachment charges. The Senate must wait at least 20 days to hold its trial, but has not yet set a date. Ravensborg pleaded no contest last year to a pair of traffic misdemeanors in the crash, including making an illegal lane change. He has cast Joseph Boover's death as a tragic accident. In narrowly voting to impeach the state's top prosecutor, the Republican-controlled House charged Ravensborg with committing crimes that caused someone's death, making numerous misrepresentations to law enforcement officers after the crash, and using his office to navigate the criminal investigation. A Senate conviction would mean Ravensborg would be barred from holding any state office in the future. Ravensborg said in a statement he is looking forward to the Senate trial, where I believe I will be vindicated. Also, just as an aside, he did put out a statement that he can't believe that the legislative body in South Dakota would impeach someone over a traffic accident. All right. Sounds like he's perfect for the Republican Party, but maybe he's just a little too perfect for them, isn't he? Let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, here's the deal. I keep hearing people call Morbius a Marvel movie when it's not. You see, superhero comics have been popular, beloved, and even great, but they haven't been consistently profitable. Hence, going into the 90s, Marvel was in deep, deep doo-doo, so they sold the film rights to some of their heroes. The Fantastic Four, Daredevil, and the X-Men went to 20th Century Fox, and they sold Spider-Man to Sony, who proceeded to turn out 2.5 decent Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire. Meanwhile, Disney buys Marvel, Marvel Studios is born, and now Marvel makes movies, but without its mutants, which for the record I think has only helped them, and without its flagship hero. Fast forward to the 2010s, and Marvel Studios wants Spidey back badly. Luckily, Sony's Andrew Garfield Spider-Man Stumble birthed negotiations which led to Marvel Studios teaching Sony how it should be done with Tom Holland in Captain America Civil War. Today, Marvel Studios remains very hands-on with actual Spidey movies, but Sony owns the rights to the character still. And because, money, they want to milk their property after its Marvel-helped successes, so they crank out Spider-Man adjacent movies, hence Venom, Venom and Carnage, and Morbius. Understanding this deal is important because there still remains a qualitative difference between a Marvel Studios film and a Sony movie. Morbius is your basic horror superhero hybrid. Arrogant, unsympathetic scientist turns himself into a monster, but we root for him because he accidentally creates a worse monster. And they stick the formula. Setup, event, chase, fight, damsel in distress, woman in a refrigerator, showdown, fight, triumph, last moment reveal to tease the sequel, done. The thing is, when Marvel movies click, the formula is just a jumping off point for interesting themes and moving character moments. That's not Morbius. But it's fine, it's decent, it's just not, marvelous. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
This is 60 Second Civics from the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. When fighting began between Confederate and Union forces in April of 1861, Abraham Lincoln acted quickly and strongly. He called up 75,000 soldiers from the state militias and requested 42,000 volunteers to the United States military for a 3-year term of duty. He also ordered a naval blockade of the Confederacy. Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus to curb anti-union activity by disloyal citizens. He also authorized the borrowing and spending of money by the federal government to pay for the war. Lincoln acted without prior approval from Congress. His very broad and extraordinary interpretation of the president's constitutional war powers was based on necessity, not precedent. Critics complained the president had acted unconstitutionally, that he had usurped power expressly granted to Congress by the Constitution. So, Lincoln called a special session of Congress on July 4th, 1861, to justify his actions and to seek legislative endorsement of them. That's all for today's podcast, 60 Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. Labor leader and socialist Eugene V. Debs was sent to prison for speaking out against World War I. Debs was a well-known figure. In 1894, he had led the American Railway Union out on a strike against the Pullman Railway Car Company. 250,000 railway workers walked off the job in support of the strike until it was brutally crushed by the United States military. Debs was arrested and served time in prison for his role in the strike. Due to his popularity, government officials were alarmed by Debs' pacifist stance. So, in 1917, when he gave a speech against World War I in Canton, Ohio, he was arrested under the Espionage Act. The act had been passed a few months prior, making it illegal to interfere with the armed services recruitment efforts during wartime. At his trial at a federal court in Cleveland, Ohio, Debs defended himself. In his final statement, he explained his motivation. "I am thinking this morning of the men in the mills and the factories, of the men in the mines and on the railroads. I am thinking of the women who for a paltry wage are compelled to work out their barren lives, of the little children who in this system are robbed of their childhood." He was found guilty, and so on this date he started his 10-year sentence. In Cleveland, infuriated unionists and socialists led a protest of Debs' imprisonment. Violence broke out during the march. Mounted police and even tanks were brought in to suppress the demonstrators. In the aftermath, 2 people were killed, more were injured, and dozens were arrested. While in prison, Debs ran for President of the United States on the socialist ticket, receiving nearly 1 million votes. Finally, in 1921, President Harding commuted Debs' sentence to time served.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 40 degrees Fahrenheit, though at just elevation a few hundred feet above us, it is cold enough to be snowing, and we expect to have a snowy mix of rain and snow this morning. And then it will become lighter and change to rain by the afternoon. And we're expecting, though, about a quarter inch of rain out of that water coming out of the sky. And we'll only be topping out at 46 degrees for the day. And then tonight we'll be in the upper 30s, occasional rain, winds light and variable. Winds today will be out of the west at 5 to 10, tonight light and variable. Though tomorrow we're going to have showers in the morning with a high in the low 50s. And then winds will be out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10, and it looks like it's bringing something a little less than a quarter inch of rain. And then it looks like we'd have a bit of another snowy mix of rain and snow, which is a snowy mix, through the rest of the week to Saturday, and then maybe a small, I don't want to call it a drying out period. And then we're going to have rain all next week, bringing quite a bit of it, by the way. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County continue to rise, even though people are using their home test kits and are not recording them with the county. We now have increased to 426,051, and our deceased remains at 517. Grass pollen is low outside the window in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good, and the daytime UV index is moderate at level 4. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.1 inches. Visibility is down to 2.6 miles, and relative humidity is at 94%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that crowdsources from around the world. London is 65 and partly cloudy. Paris is 61 degrees and mostly cloudy. Rome is 71 and sunny. Kyiv is 42 and cloudy. Kabul is 57 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 76 and fair. Tokyo is 67 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 61 degrees with quite a bit of rain. San Francisco, California is 45 and mostly cloudy. And New York is 63 degrees Fahrenheit and mostly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that crowdsources from around the world. Sylvie Corbet, Samuel Petraquin, and Raph Kasser of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. French President Emmanuel Macron and extreme-right politician Marine Le Pen voiced two radically opposed visions of Europe on Tuesday yesterday, one resolutely advocating for a bloc of 27 nations, the other defending her French nationalist mottos. If Macron falters in France's April 24th presidential runoff between the two, the far right could be at the helm of the European Union, an abhorrent idea to most leaders in the bloc. Experts say a win for Le Pen would have immense repercussions on the functioning of the EU. Not only would her coming to power damage the democratic values and commercial rules of the bloc, but it would also threaten the EU's common front and sanctions in response to Russia's war in Ukraine.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Jim Mustian of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A cryptocurrency expert was sentenced yesterday, Tuesday, to more than 5 years in federal prison for helping North Korea evade U.S. sanctions. Virgil Griffith, age 39, pleaded guilty last year to conspiracy, admitting he presented at a cryptocurrency conference in Pyongyang in 2019, even after the U.S. government denied his request to travel there. A well-known hacker, Griffith has also developed cryptocurrency infrastructure and equipment inside North Korea. Prosecutors wrote in court papers. At the 2019 conference, he advised more than 100 people, including several who appeared to work for the North Korean government, on how to use cryptocurrency to evade sanctions and achieve independence from the global banking system. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Metro's Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.